Have you ever met someone who thinks they own everything around them just because they shout the loudest? Well, let me tell you about the day my neighbor, who everyone called Karen, decided that my private land should become the community playground. She thought she could boss me around, take my property, and humiliate me in front of my neighbors. But she had no idea that her arrogance would end up costing her something far bigger than a piece of land, her own home. When I bought my little piece of land, I was filled with excitement. It wasn't the fanciest property in the neighborhood, but it was mine. A small house, some open green space, and a backyard that gave me peace after a long day of work. I wasn't looking for trouble. I just wanted a quiet place to live, away from drama. But trouble has a way of finding you when someone else thinks they deserve what you've worked for. That someone was Karen. From the very first day, she made her presence known. The moment I moved in, she showed up at my door, not with a welcome gift, but with a list of demands. She said, "Since you're new here, let me explain how things work. We're all part of the homeowners association, and you'll need to follow the rules." Now, I had no problem with rules. I'm a respectful person, but the way she said it wasn't kind, it was controlling. Her tone told me that she didn't see me as a neighbor. She saw me as someone she could control. At first, her demands seemed small. She complained about where I parked my car. She criticized the color of my mailbox. She even told me to cut down a tree in my yard because it blocked her view. I brushed it off, thinking she just wanted attention. But then she set her eyes on something bigger, my land. Behind my house, I had a nice open lot. It wasn't huge, but it was spacious enough for gardening, hosting barbecues, or just relaxing. To me, it was the most peaceful part of my property. But to Karen, it was wasted space. One day, she marched up to me, her clipboard in hand, her sunglasses pushed down just enough to glare at me. She said, "We've decided that your backyard would make the perfect playground for the neighborhood kids. You don't really use it, so we'll need you to hand it over." I thought I misheard her. Hand it over? This is my property. I paid for it. But Karen just smirked. Well, the HOA believes it would serve the community better. You wouldn't want to be the selfish neighbor, would you? Selfish? I was shocked. I worked hard to afford this property. Why should I give it up just because she wanted it? I stood my ground and said, "I'm sorry, but this land isn't up for discussion. It's mine." That's when her sweet tone dropped and the real Karen came out. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "The HOA always gets what it wants." From that moment, the war began. Karen started a campaign against me. She spread rumors, telling neighbors that I was greedy and unfriendly. She filed fake complaints with the HOA, saying my grass was too tall, my fence was too low, and my trash cans weren't stored properly. Every week, I would get a new letter in the mail with some ridiculous violation. It was exhausting. I felt like I was being bullied in my own home. But I wasn't about to give up. I kept records of every letter, every complaint, every false accusation. I knew one day this would come back to haunt her. But Karen wasn't done. She doubled down. She went around the neighborhood, collecting signatures for a petition to force me to turn my backyard into a playground. Can you believe that? A playground on land I paid for without my permission. Some neighbors signed because they were scared of her. Others signed because they believed her lies. Suddenly, I was painted as a villain in a story I didn't create. One afternoon, I walked outside and found Karen and a few others standing in my backyard without my permission. They were measuring the land, sketching out plans, and talking about where the swings and slides would go. That was the moment I snapped. "Get out of my yard." I shouted. Karen crossed her arms and sneered. "You can't stop progress. This will be a playground, whether you like it or not." I called the police for trespassing, but by the time they arrived, Karen and her crew had left. Still, I filed a report. I wasn't going to let her push me around. Weeks turned into months, and the battle only grew uglier. The HOA started fining me for things that weren't even violations. They threatened to put a lien on my house. Karen smiled every time she saw me, as if she was winning. But here's the thing about people like Karen. They always go too far. And when they do, they reveal their true colors. One day, I received a letter from the HOA stating that they were moving forward with the playground project. They claimed they had the authority to take a portion of my land for community use. My blood boiled. They were trying to steal my property. That's when I knew I had to fight back legally. I hired a lawyer and showed him everything. The false complaints, the petition, the trespassing report, the harassment. He shook his head in disbelief and said, "They don't have the right to take your land. And from what you've shown me, we have a strong case." So we filed a lawsuit. Now, go to court wasn't easy. It was stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. But I refused to let Karen bully me out of what was mine. When the court date came, Karen strutted in like she already owned the place. She was dressed as if she were attending a fashion show, not a legal hearing. She whispered loudly to her friends about how I was going to lose everything. But when the judge began reviewing the evidence, the tone shifted. We presented a stack of false complaints. We showed photos of Karen trespassing in my yard. We provided witness statements from neighbors who admitted Karen pressured them into signing the petition. The judge's face grew stern. He looked directly at Karen and asked, "Do you realize that what you've done could be considered harassment, fraud, and an abuse of HOA power?" Karen tried to play innocent, saying, "I was only doing what's best for the community." But the judge wasn't buying it. He slammed down his gavel and said, "This court will not tolerate abuse of power. You cannot take someone's private property for personal gain." Then came the twist that left the entire courtroom in shock. The judge didn't just dismiss the HOA's claim. He ruled that Karen had acted with such malice and dishonesty that she had to face serious consequences. He ordered her to pay damages, and when she couldn't afford it, she was forced to sell her own house. The very woman who tried to take my land ended up losing her own. As I walked out of that courtroom, I felt a mix of relief and justice. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. Karen had finally learned that bullying, lying, and manipulating others doesn't pay off. And the best part? My land remained mine, untouched, peaceful, exactly as it should be. So, what would you do if your neighbor tried to steal your property? Would you stand your ground, or would you give in to pressure? Let me know in the comments. And stick around, because in the next part, I'll reveal the shocking aftermath of Karen's downfall, how the neighborhood reacted, and the lessons everyone learned from this wild battle. Don't miss it. Have you ever wondered what happens after the villain of the story finally faces justice? What happens when the bully loses, when the liar is exposed, and when the person who tried to take everything suddenly has nothing left? Well, that's exactly what happened after Karen. The HOA queen who wanted my land for a playground was ordered by the judge to sell her own house. You'd think the story ended in the courtroom, but let me tell you, the real drama began afterward. When the ruling came down, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. For months, I had lived under stress, waiting for the next violation letter, the next knock on my door, the next confrontation. Suddenly, all of that was gone. My land was safe. My home was mine. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. But while I was relieved, Karen's world began to fall apart. At first, she tried to pretend nothing had happened. She walked around the neighborhood with her head held high, like she was still in control. But the whispers started almost immediately. Neighbors who once supported her now avoided her. Parents who thought she was protecting the community realized she had lied. People began asking questions, hard questions, like, why did you try to take someone else's property? And how could you misuse the HOA like that? Karen had built her entire identity on being the powerful neighbor, the one everyone respected, or at least feared. But now she was exposed. And nothing spreads faster in a neighborhood than gossip about someone's downfall. The financial side hit her even harder. The judge's ruling wasn't just about stopping the playground. Karen had to pay for all the damage she caused, my legal fees, the false fines, and compensation for harassment. The total amount was more than she could handle. She tried negotiating. She begged for more time. She even claimed she was misunderstood. But the court wasn't having it. When the bills started piling up, she had no choice. She put her house on the market. I'll never forget the sight of that for sale sign going up in front of her perfect little lawn. The same lawn she once bragged about. The same house she had flaunted as proof of her status. It was like watching karma arrive with a big red bow. But here's the twist. Even though I had won, the atmosphere in the neighborhood was still tense. Some people came up to me quietly and said, "We're glad you stood up to her. She was out of control." Others avoided me, maybe embarrassed that they had once signed a petition against me. And then there were a few who whispered, "Did you really have to take it that far?" At first, I felt conflicted. Did I go too far? Should I have tried harder to settle things peacefully? But then I remembered, I didn't start this war. I didn't trespass on someone else's land. I didn't spread lies. I didn't misuse power. I defended myself. And if I hadn't, Kara would have taken everything. Standing your ground isn't about revenge. It's about protecting what's yours. In the weeks that followed, Karen's house sat on the market. She tried to hide the reason she was selling, telling potential buyers she was downsizing or moving for work. But word got around. Everyone knew the truth. And, in a way, that truth became her punishment. One by one, moving trucks started carrying her furniture out. The same woman who had tried to measure my backyard for a playground was now packing up her own belongings. And then, just like that, she was gone. Now, you'd think the story ended there. But here's where it gets interesting. With Karen out of the picture, the neighborhood actually began to change. The HOA meetings, which used to feel like a courtroom with her in charge, became calmer. People spoke up more. Decisions were made fairly. The fear was gone. Neighbors who had once avoided me started coming around. Some even apologized. One woman said, "I'm sorry I believed her lies. She made it sound like you were the problem." Another admitted, "We signed petition because we were scared of her, not because we agreed with her." Hearing those words stung a little, because for months I had felt alone in that fight. But at the same time, it felt good to know the truth had finally come out. And here's the biggest lesson I learned. Bullies don't always look like bullies. Sometimes they hide behind titles, rules, or fake kindness. Karen claimed she cared about the community, but really, she cared about control. She claimed she wanted what was best for the kids, but really, she wanted power. That's why it's so important to question motives, to look beyond the surface, and to remember that just because someone speaks loudly doesn't mean they're right. Personally, I walked away from the whole experience with a stronger backbone. Before this, I used to avoid conflict at all costs. I thought keeping the peace was more important than speaking up. But Karen taught me that silence only feeds bullies. If you don't stand up for yourself, someone will walk all over you. Defending your boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Months after she left, life finally returned to normal. I started enjoying my backyard again. I planted a small garden, built a little seating area, and spent evenings watching the sun go down without worrying about who might show up at my fence with a clipboard. The neighborhood kids still played, but on the actual playground down the street, the one built by the city, not stolen from someone's backyard. Parents brought them there happily, without needing to step on anyone else's rights. It felt peaceful, balanced, right. Sometimes when I see a for sale sign go up in someone else's yard, I think back to Karen's downfall, and I remind myself, power built on lies never lasts. Control built on fear always crumbles. And in the end, the truth always wins. So what do you think? Was justice served when Karen lost her house? Or do you believe the punishment was too harsh? If you ever dealt with a difficult neighbor or an unfair HOA, share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss another story of standing up, fighting back, and winning against the odds.